10 years on since the US-led invasion, and all is still not well in Iraq. The Americans claimed the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's regime would bring democracy and an end to the suppression of minorities. But for many weeks now, the country has been gripped by popular protests against Nouri al-Maliki's regime. Here's Emily Churchill with more.
It was the biggest demonstration in British history. On the 15th of February 2003, an estimated 1 million people took to the streets to try to stop the US-led military intervention in Iraq. But they were not successful, and a month later an invasion was launched that would unleash years of brutal sectarian violence. Estimates of the human cost of the war vary wildly. The Iraqi body count organisation said there were a maximum of 106,000 civilian deaths up to July 2010. But in 2006, the Lancet journal published a much higher figure, saying the number of Iraqi civilians and combatants killed up until that point was over 600,000. What isn't in doubt is that the weapons of mass destruction given as the justification for the war were never found. But supporters of the intervention say it can only be a good thing that Iraq was freed of Saddam Hussein, a brutal dictator who tortured and killed his opponents. However, today's Iraq is far from being the stable democracy the then British Prime Minister Tony Blair was hoping for when he sent troops to Iraq 10 years ago. Scenes like this have become all too familiar over the past decade. Police and medics say at least 31 people were killed in car bombings in Iraq last Friday, as sectarian violence grows ahead of provincial elections. Here in Baghdad, 2 car bombs exploded in a street market in the Shia district of Kadhimiya, killing a reported 16 people. There is dissatisfaction, too, with the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, whose Shia-led government has been accused of arbitrary detention, torture and other abuses by Human Rights Watch. Many in Iraq's Sunni minority feel they're being marginalised by Maliki's government. They've been demonstrating against his rule in their tens of thousands since December. Maliki says he will listen to legitimate demands, but warned that militants may be hijacking the protests. So, is this all part of the painful road to democracy, or were the hundreds of thousands who took to the streets against the war right? Those on either side of this emotive debate continue to disagree, just as they did 10 years ago. Emily Churchill, Islam Channel.
Well, earlier today, a Labour MP here in Britain made an unprecedented admission that the war in Iraq was based on what he said was a primitive understanding of Islam. Now, this comes from the party that led us to war in the first place in 2003. Do initial supporters of the war still think it brought some good? Or do the hundreds of thousands of dead and the popular discontent that is still strong in Iraq prove that the invasion was a disaster? Here to discuss this with me are Tahrir Swift, co-founder of Tadamun, and Tom Wilson, fellow at the Institute for Middle Eastern Democracy based here in London. Tahrir, let me bring you in first of all. Your family was very strong opponents of Saddam Hussein.
Yes.
Was it a good thing that he was overthrown?
Not the way it was done. I mean, he wasn't just overthrown. The whole country was subjected to a very brutal war and came out completely destroyed. Not only the military destruction, but also the aftermath, the destruction and dismantling of most of the government institutions, which really has made Iraq into a failed state. That can't really be good. I mean, just to remove one person, you have to destroy the whole country. I'm opposed to the war. My father, who was severely tortured by Saddam Hussein, he was also a ferocious opponent of the war, because we knew those people who subjected Iraq to horrible sanctions, which are another type of warfare, really, who did not allow Iraqis to repair water and sewage and electricity plants, are not going to bring us, democracy with their bombs.
But the Americans have now not been in Iraq for over a year. Their troops pulled out totally. So the blame now must rest with the government. Is it going forwards or backwards? Do you think it's getting at all better?
Sorry, can I just tackle this business of they're not enough? They have got the biggest embassy in the whole world. It is in east of Baghdad, and that is housing, I don't know, 2,000 people.
No, but they're not running the country. There is a government, Nouri al-Maliki's government.
They have military advisors, and they have military advisors, and they have presence there as consultants or trainers and things like that. They have put mechanisms before. The withdrawal didn't come arbitrarily. They have done the job. They have put in place a government that's going to do the job for them. Basically, it's not going to veer off their plans. This is what
well, Tom Wilson, let me come to you. You supported the invasion, I believe, in 2003. Do you have any misgivings now?
Well, retrospectively, I think given the choice between still having Saddam in power, as presumably we would had there not have been intervention, and having him for the foreseeable future and all of the horrors that that entailed with the almost certain handover to his sons, who were, I think we can safely say would have been probably more brutal even than Saddam himself. If that was the choice or the prospects that Iraq now has for rebuilding itself and taking what no doubt will be a difficult road towards becoming a free and democratic country, I think that's, by all estimations, preferable to the continuation of Saddam.
But the last 10 years of Saddam, not 100,000 people were not killed. So more people have died in the decade since he fell than in the last 10 years of his power, surely.
Sure. Well, after the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, obviously the international community was doing a lot more as far as the no-fly zones were concerned to try and hold back Saddam's ability to hurt his own people. But as we saw from the uprising in 1991 and the way in which he reacted to that, had there been an Arab Spring taking place in Iraq today with Saddam in power, I think that the scenes that we would be seeing would be far worse than anything we've witnessed in Syria.
Well, we are having a kind of Arab Spring in Iraq. We've just seen pictures on the screen of the demonstrations against Nouri al-Maliki.
Right. And
it's
actually the banner,
not a stable country. But to just look forward a little bit, do you think that it is getting slowly better or is it getting slowly worse?
Well, no thanks to the government. The government is not doing any reconstructions. It's siphoning all Iraq. I don't know, somebody was saying $660 billion is the oil revenue since the government came to power, and they've, since 2005, and there's nothing to show for it. Basic services are not there. Security is not there, and we're having like 70 children in a classroom, and no schools have been built. I mean, it really is, it's in a very bad situation at the moment. Basic services, there's nothing to justify not being able to bring clean water, electricity, and sewage, and rebuild all these. These should be the #1 priority. Nobody has done that. The corruptions started with Bremer, with 2 billion, 12 billion of Iraqis' money completely lost. Can I just say something about we would have had Saddam there, and we would have his sons. I mean, this is just a big assumption, because most people who, even the supporters of Saddam, they hated his sons. They couldn't stand his sons. So this is nonsense that we were gonna have. That was the only way to get rid of him. That was not the only way to get rid of him. It's a big thing to say. There was definitely different ways of dealing with a war criminal. And at the end of the day, when they got him, and he was supposed to be standing trial for Halabja, they went and delivered him to the Maliki government to be executed in the most disgusting, despicable way. Doesn't help democracy, doesn't help reconciliation, doesn't help moving on from that area. And the human rights situation is a lot worse now. We've got the banner of the demonstrations you were talking about. Their banner was saying, can you please release all women prisoners, because there are horrible, horrible stories coming out of prisons of women being raped. And
let me come back to Tom. I mean, how do you deal with that point? I mean, isn't this a legacy of the invasion, this kind of turmoil that is still going on in Iraq?
The truth is that however Saddam or his regime was going to be removed, I think always would have led to some form of power vacuum and power struggle between the different ethnic and religious groups in Iraq. I think that it was never going to be easy, and he was never going to go quietly. On the issue...
They didn't say that before the war, did they? They said everything goes in hand. That's what Blair told us.
On the issue of obviously the human rights problems that there continue to be in Iraq, I think that is in part a legacy of the very long regime, which was a brutal regime, which instilled a culture of corruption in the governing classes in Iraq. And I think it's going to be a process that will take a long time, but I don't think anyone could deny that it's moving in a more positive direction when you've got a free and open press, when the Iraqis are able to openly debate and decide what kind of constitution they want to have. And if they oppose this government in the majority, then they can, of course, vote in upcoming elections to remove it.
Well, except that this is a Shia-led government, and the Sunnis, the vice president, was accused of treason, and now is living abroad. I mean, it is a very ethnically or sectarian-based government, isn't it? Thanks largely to the Americans, who created a constitution which gave quotas to all these different people according to their ethnicity, and it's fomented this problem.
Journalists, please look at the journalists. How many journalists have been killed and have been tortured and have been, even in the north. I mean, it's nonsense to say we have free press, because I can go and say whatever I like in Baghdad, but there's no guarantee nobody's going to kill me.
I just wanted to get Tom to deal with this sectarian point.
Exactly. The sectarian problem is always going to be there in Iraq because of the nature of the country. And then you have discussions about, are you going to break up Iraq? I don't think that's what the Iraqi people want. I think that some form of federal democracy is probably the right way to move forward. But I think that what's important is that the Iraqi people themselves are the ones who are able to determine that. And if they need to change their constitution, then I would hope that that's something that can happen. And that is the whole point of instilling democracy, is that the Iraqi people can become masters of their own destiny and decide which way they want to go with their country.
The problem is the political system that you've installed, which is based on ethnic quota. So people are going to be in power because of what sect or what ethnic group they belong to, not because they are the right people. When you have a country that has to be subjected to war and deliberating sanctions, you need somebody who's going to be able to know how to build it. We need the right person in the right place, and that hasn't happened. It's nepotism and corruption, and that started, unfortunately, it's not by Saddam, or it started by Brahma. The Abu Ghraib, when it comes to human rights violations, the Abu Ghraib scandal, and like I said, that's not me, Financial Times and The Guardian, the 12 billion of Iraq's money, Iraq's own money. I mean, this guy, Paul Brahma, should be put on trial.
Completely. The corruption, sure, the corruption
So you didn't bring us democracy, you brought us corruption and abuse of human rights that has continued.
Let's Tom have a chance.
Yeah,
no, of course it brought democracy, and the whole point is if these people are that corrupt, then the Iraqi people should have the ability to remove them. I agree that you obviously have a problem when one ethnic group is dominating the government, but it's certainly preferable to under Saddam Hussein, when it was essentially just his clan who was dominating the entire government. So
democracy evolves when you have stability, when you have... it doesn't come with war. And Iraq is unstable. And there's no democracy without accountability. There's no accountability at any stage. We have a transparency committee. And every time it takes its job seriously and accuses somebody in power of it, they get killed. And here in the UK, by the way, I want to say this on television. In the UK, we have Abdel Fattah al-Sudani, who used to be the trade minister, who's now been sentenced to 7 years because he was selling the ration cards. And he's here. He said, no, you can't. He said, and I quote, and I sent it to my MP, "You can't touch me, I'm British." And he's here. Most of these people, Al-Jafari, he was for 9 months, he was a prime minister. Before that, he was living here on benefits, and he was claiming incapacity benefits. He's not very well. But he became a prime minister for 9 months, and then he's bought massive houses and loads of money in this country. So, and there are these people, they're not even interested in investing the money they get inside Iraq. They're taking it abroad. And to tell us that we can get rid of them, we can't get rid of them. The Maliki himself has got 900 people protecting him. Every single politician has got his own militia. You have created a culture of warlords that we didn't have before. So the problem is just becoming more and more difficult.
Move on to the other angle, which is not so much what's happened in Iraq, and you've described that very well in your terms, but the position of the West. I mean, one of the reasons why the West went in was because they thought it would make Britain and the West safer from this cruel dictator, etc., who was a threat. I mean, do you really think that the West is now safer because of the invasion of Iraq?
Certainly, I think that the government of Iraq is far less of a threat to the West and to the entire region than Saddam Hussein was, who had attacked 3 of his neighbours, and who, as we know, had programs of weapons of mass destruction that he used on his neighbours.
I'm not talking about whether the government of Iraq is a threat. I'm talking about the other threats, that we've created a whole army of jihadis who are against the invasion of a Arab country, a Muslim country, by a Western army, and are now out for revenge. And that is why we get suicide bomb attacks and other things happening.
Well, I think that the biggest attack of all, which of course was September the 11th, happened before the invasion of Iraq, and throughout the 1990s there had been attacks on Western and American targets. So I don't think that you can claim that we were completely safe and then suddenly this is what's created.
I'm not claiming that. I'm saying, are we safer than we were when Saddam was in power and before this jihadi threat extended itself around the Middle East and
sure,
in
but
North
I think
Africa?
particularly that there was a problem on the part of the West when it went into Iraq to not have fully shored up the country to stop Al-Qaeda from coming into Iraq, that they should have been more aware of that and prepared for it. But I think if what you're going to say is that dealing with Iraq created more problems and created more of a threat, then what are you essentially saying? You're saying that you would rather not intervene because of unforeseen consequences, but not intervening and not doing anything has its own unforeseen consequences and undesirable effects as well.
You're not been intervening, I'm afraid. And throughout the 80s, Saddam was your friend. May 1990, Senator Bob Dole put his arms around Saddam Hussein and said to be your true friend of the West. That is after Halabja. After Halabja, the UK gave Saddam $1 billion worth of credit. So, you know, this human rights business and not intervening, you have been intervening. Saddam was the Western blue-eyed boy until his time is finished. Now we've got somebody else. And you know, this is it. This is continuous intervention. It's not really helping at all, and it's destabilizing the whole region, and it's creating more hatred for yourself and more terrorism threat than before. Because Saddam was not happy. He didn't like Bin Laden. He didn't, you know, he's completely, you know, opposed to them. And he actually just on the eve of the war, he warned against people coming into Iraq as jihadists.
Well, I completely agree that the failed policies of past Western governments as far as supporting dictators such as Mubarak and others is completely condemnable, and that's one of the reasons that I think that we should be in favour of course, and that's one of the reasons we should be in favour of the democratic process within the Middle East. But I don't think that just because past Western administrations have made mistakes that now means that we have to sit back and say, fine, we're going to take whatever's thrown at the West. I think that it's only right that we try and redress the mistakes that we have made by supporting democracy and opposing these same dictatorships.
I would be very, very happy.
Of course, I would be completely in favour of that. I would by no means support everything that all Western governments have done throughout the 20th century.
Any kind of sort of hesitancy now among Western leaders about intervening in the Muslim world?
And I think with disastrous consequences, I think that we see that with Syria in particular, is because of the experiences with Iraq and Afghanistan, there's just no appetite anymore. And the effect of that is being felt by the Syrian people, 70,000 of which have now been murdered by the Assad regime. This is what it means. And I think that the West should be ashamed that it would sit back and not intervene in the way that it did, I think, to its credit, for instance, in the Balkans, where it intervened to save Muslims from being massacred there. And I think it needs to do the same.
So you're in favour of a military intervention by the West in Syria?
I personally would be in favour of some form of airstrikes or use of no-fly zone, some kind of practical measures that are taken rather than simply statements that are being made that would limit Assad's ability to harm his own people.
And what if the United Nations doesn't agree to that, which of course it isn't at the moment because of Russia and China? I mean, would you want the West to go in unilaterally as they did in Iraq 10 years ago?
Well, on the legality issue, I think that you essentially, because as you mentioned, because of Russia and China, you have this problem where do you sit on your hands, as was done in Rwanda, Sri Lanka, and watch these massacres take place, or as we did in Sierra Leone and in the Balkans, do you intervene to protect people from despotic regimes? I think that morally there's a very strong case to be made for intervening on humanitarian grounds.
I really find it difficult to swallow, this business of Iraqis are, you know, victims of Saddam Hussein. I actually went after the war, May 2003. And the evidence, in a very short time, I found so much evidence of people resisting the regime within their own way. You know, it's nonsense. The intervention doesn't help. I mean, I was looking forward to the day we get rid of Saddam Hussein and we learn from all those lessons and we move forward. But now the problems are compounded. You know, I mean, before the war, I have met Baathists who were not happy with Saddam and not happy with all the killing. And I was so happy that there are, you know, there is a hope. Those people now are silenced because of the way, disgusting way he was killed. And we have lost our historic opportunity to learn from the lessons of dictatorship. We have now, these people have got a lot of suffering. Now we've got a lot more people suffering, and we're not going to learn the lessons.
Do you detect that, I mean, we mentioned in the lead up to the programme that Jim Murphy, a Labour MP, the Shadow Defence Secretary, now says that the invasion of Iraq was based on a primitive understanding of Islam. Do you sense that any other leading politicians in Britain or America are changing their mind about Iraq?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I was at that debate in Goldsmith last week, and the Huffington Post ran that debate, and they said they have contacted 60 people asking them to come and argue for the war, and many people who supported the war turned down that invitation. So it is very difficult it's obviously it went wrong, completely wrong. Mr. Blair was telling us, as the bombs, I remember it very well, because I watched everything, when the bombs were falling on Iraq, and you can sense the unease of the ordinary people who read The Sun and the Express and whatever, unease that they're actually taking part in this. He said, we will help them build their hospitals and their schools. They did nothing. Nothing has been done. And so much money has been siphoned off from the Iraq reconstruction program. I mean, these people, and you can't have democracy without accountability. You can't just keep on doing these things. People kill and then they don't face justice. People steal and they don't face justice. And the people who, and they all have another passport and they can run away whenever they like when they face the law. And Human Rights Watch was saying that basically the justice system is completely corrupt and broken.
Can I come back on this point about removing Saddam? The truth is, if we agree that the gassing of the Kurds, what happened to the Marsh Arabs, what Saddam was doing to his own people was wrong, if we agree that Saddam needs to be removed, then the only question you have was how was it going to be done and who was it going to be done by? And I think that it was more preferable to have an international, well-trained military force to do that than to send Iraqi... Well, or the other alternative was that the Iraqi people attempt to remove him themselves, as they did in 1991, with disastrous consequences. It would have seen men, women and children killed in the streets. There's no way that this could have been done peacefully or quietly. It just wouldn't have happened.
I'm sorry, we're going to have to end this. This is obviously an argument that's going to run and run, but we can't go on tonight any longer. So thank you very much, Tom Wilson and Tara Swift. And that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks to you all. Thanks to you for watching. And we'll be back next week. From me, Jonathan Steele. Good night.